Hi guys, it's Reagan and welcome back to another video. This video is quite literally 6 months in the making. That's right, today I'm going to be chatting through every single book I've read so far this year and give you my top 5 favorite books so far. Honestly, this list was so hard to narrow down. I feel like this year has been the year of like total hits or total misses. You'll see there's quite the swing between star ratings between the books. I feel like I either loved it or hated it. That being said, I have read a total of 38 books so far this year, so without further ado, let's go ahead and dive right in. Oh, quick note, if you want any more in-depth thoughts on any of my thoughts and feelings about these books, I will of course have my wrap-ups linked down below, which of course I go over all these books in more detail. But without further ado, let's jump into January. So starting off the year, I read a very hyped YA duology, the first one being These Violent Delights by Chloe Gong, which I gave a 2.5 stars to. Then I finished up that duology by also completing the second book, Our Violent Ends, also by Chloe Gong, which I gave like a 2.75 stars as well. Not my favorite. I am curious to read more books by this author, but that's how I started out the year. From there, though, I picked up The Hod King by Josiah Bancroft, book 3 to the Senlin Ascend series. Loved it. Favorite book in this series, which is one of my all-time favorite series, and I gave it 5 stars. Then I also picked up Before They Were Hanged by Joe Abercrombie, book 2 to the First Law trilogy. Another one of my all-time favorite fantasy trilogies. I also gave this book 5 stars. And I wanted a bit of a thriller, so I read The 22 Murders of Madison May by Max Berry, which I gave a 3.75 4 stars. And then lastly, for the month of January, I read Beartown by Frederick Bachman. Sobbed my eyes out. Incredible character work and just a community-based story. A 4.5 stars as well. Alrighty, now moving on for the month of February. The first book I completed was The Dragon Reborn by Robert Jordan, book 3 to the Wheel of Time, which I gave 3 stars. Then I read Beasts of a Little Land by Joo-Hae Kim, which I gave 4 stars. Next was The Night Circus by Erin Morgenstern, which I gave 3.75 4 stars. An incredibly hyped book. I loved the writing and the lyrical nature of the story as well as the atmosphere, but I felt the characterization could have used a bit of work. Still enjoyed it though. Happy I read it. Next is A Cat to Warrior by Nandia Korafor, book 2 to one of my favorite YA fantasy series. This was a delight, an incredible expansion on this world, story, and characters. 4.5 stars. From there, I read Murder of Crows by Anne Bishop, book 2 to a fun urban fantasy paranormal series. I gave this book 3.5 stars. And then lastly, for the month of February, I read Tristan Strong Punches a Hole in the Sky by Kawami Mabalia, an incredible first book to a new middle grade series. Amazing writing, amazing characters, amazing magic, amazing concept. So good. 4.5 5 stars. Moving on to the month of March, which was a rather busy month for me, but I was still actually able to read quite a bit. The first book is Beach Read by Emily Henry, which I gave like a 3.5 stars to. Then I started the Rain Wild Chronicles by Robin Hobb, the first one being The Dragon Keeper, which I gave a 4 stars to. I'm really enjoying this series. It's not my favorite of all of the series, but I do feel like it's still very good and a bit underappreciated if I say so myself. Then I picked up The Maid by Nita Pross, which is a fun like whodunit murder mystery style story. I gave this a 3.25 stars. Next is A River Enchanted by Rebecca Ross. I loved this lyrical fantasy novel. It was beautiful, entrancing. 4 stars for me. Next up was Velvet Was the Night by Silvia Moreno Garcia, a noir style story set in the 70s in Mexico City. Tension and everything was there. 4 stars as well. Next up, I read another weird, dark lyrical fantasy story, which is A Witch's Heart by Genevieve Gornichek. This was another 4-star read. Lots of good reads in the month of March. And then lastly, I read If I Had Your Face by Frances Cha, which I gave 5 stars. Amazing. One of my favorite literary fiction stories I've read in a while. Moving on to the month of April, which was definitely a month of high highs and low lows. The first book I was able to complete was The Justice of Kings by Richard Swan, which I adored. A fantastic debut fantasy novel, which was just so gripping. I gave this a 4.5 stars. Next up, I then picked up The Fall of Babel by Josiah Bancroft, the 4th and final book to the Senlin Ascend series, which I've already mentioned is one of my favorites. This 4th book was good, probably my least favorite in this series. I'd probably give it like a 3.75 4 stars, but still feel like it wrapped up everything like how I could have wanted it to. And I picked up Daughter of the Moon Goddess by Su Lin Tan, which I gave a 2.5 stars to. Next, I have Vision in Silver by Anne Bishop, which I also gave 3.5 stars. Then I have Dragon Haven by Robin Hobb, Book 2 to the Rain Wild Chronicles. Again, I'm really enjoying this series. I gave Book 2 4.5 stars. And then lastly, probably one of the worst books I read this year so far, we have House of Breath and Sky, Book 2 to the Crescent City series by Sarah J. Maas, which I gave 2 stars. Now on to the month of May. I started the month with another hyped release and was incredibly disappointed. And that book is Book of Night by Holly Black, which I also gave 2 stars. From there, I read The Atlas 6 by Olivier Blake, which I gave 4.5 stars to. Then we have Daughter of the Forest by Juliette Marillier, which I loved, 5 out of 5 stars. Next is Kayake by Vaishnavi Patel, which I gave 3.75 stars. And then lastly, I have My Brilliant Friend by Elena Ferrante, which I also gave 5 stars. Alrighty, moving on to the last month of books. First, we have The Beautiful Ones by Silvia Moreno Garcia. I loved this book. It absolutely delighted me from beginning to end. I could not put this down. Probably the book I was most addicted to while reading it so far this year. Then I have The Cartographers by Peng Shepherd, which I gave 3 stars. Next up is Rosewater by Tade Thompson, which I gave 3.75 stars. Next is Light from Uncommon Stars by Raika Aoki, which I gave 4.5 stars. From there, I read Mrs. Death, which has to be one of the weirdest books I've read so far this year, but very, very good, 4 stars. Speaking of weird books, I also read The Bone Orchard by Sarah A. Mueller, which I also gave like 4.5 stars to. So weird, but so good. Then I read The Vanishing Half by Britt Bennett, incredible literary fiction story. Lived up to all expectations from the writing, plot, and characters. It fully delivered, 4.5 stars. And then lastly, I have Legends and Lattes by Travis Beldry, which is a cozy fantasy read, which I gave 4 stars to. Alrighty, so that is every single book I've read so far this year. Again, a little bit of a moving scale when it comes to ratings. I'll have, again, all my wrap-ups linked down below, but let's get into my top 5. Truthfully, it was so hard to narrow down to this top 5, so these are in no particular order. Honestly, I feel like I could have easily added 4 more to this list, as I had quite a few 5-star reads so far this year, but nonetheless, I was able to narrow it down, so let's chat about them. The first book I'm going to talk about is Before They Were Hanged by Joe Abercrombie. The First Law trilogy has quickly become one of my all-time favorite fantasy trilogies. From the writing to the characters to the plot, Joe Abercrombie has gripped me entirely. The first book made my top 10 list last year, and I thought the second one was even better than the first one, so needless to say, this is for sure considered one of my top reads. I'm also currently reading the third and final book in this trilogy and loving it as well. This is a grimdark fantasy trilogy, and what I think I love most about it is just how character focused it is, and because this world is full of such gray morality, it's really hard to predict how our characters are actually going to act within the world itself. The first book is a hyper-focused, like detailed viewed into all of the characters, their thoughts, their feelings, their motivations, and then with book 2, the plot and the world actually begin to be cracked open. So it's really satisfying because you have all the context and character like plot lines you could possibly need. So in Experience book 2, it was just such a good ride from beginning to end. This is a multi-POV tale, and the cast itself continues to grow book over book, and there's many characters we actually read from the perspective of. That being said though, I would argue that there are perhaps 3 main characters. The first is Logan, who is a warrior from the north. He was once a part of this band of warriors where they got separated at the beginning of book 1, and he begins to travel south. He kind of links up with this magic wielder who claims to have this like significant fate and destiny, and he needs Logan to tag along, so he decides to do so because he has nothing better to do, and he quickly gets like sucked into all these southern politics he had no interest in. Our next main character is Glokta, who was once a very powerful individual in the army. He was dashing, he was powerful, he was strong, but during the war he was actually captured and tortured for a significant amount of time. This resulted in him having a lot of long-term life-altering injuries, which significantly changed his life path, and now he's kind of like a civil servant investigator for the crown. Basically, he tortures people for a living, and for some reason he's my favorite character. I have fallen in love with him. He's so smart, he's so intelligent, and his chapters tend to be very politically focused. And lastly, lastly, I would say our third and final main character is Giselle. He is a pompous and flighty and annoying young man in the army who just wants to enter the sword competition and get a lot of ladies. I feel like all of these characters have these arcs where for some reason you fall in love with them for their own reasons. And that's what makes this story so engaging. These characters on paper seem like people you should hate, but slowly you get very attached to them, and the plot itself is just so engaging you can't put it down. I loved the second book so much. I'm really enjoying the third book, and I can't wait to finish this up and then also check out more books in Joe Abercrombie's world. From there, I have a bit of a pivot and I have a literary fiction option, and that is If I Had Your Face by Frances Cha. This is another multi-POV kind of slice of life coming of age tale set in modern day Seoul. In this book, we follow a multitude of different perspectives of young girls who all live either with each other or around each other in the same building. And you see this sort of crisscrossing of life experiences as they're intrinsically connected to each other, but also following their own paths. This book specifically dives into topics such as beauty standards, plastic surgery, sexism, classism, and how all of these different topics impact these different women in different ways. It's truly a slice of life tale in the way that you're literally just dropped into their world, trying to capture and understand all of their different motivations. And just as quickly as you're dropped in, you're pulled out once again, almost right at that moment where you're beginning to understand them and feel a little bit comfortable, which I felt was so effective because it truly just felt like a whirlwind of experiences and emotions. And you're following all these different perspectives and you quickly begin to understand who they are. Even if you might not necessarily agree with all of their choices, you're still rooting for them deeply to ultimately live the happiest life they can. And by the end of this book, you're feeling a little bit hopeful. While this book is rather dark, you're hoping that their journey brings them to a place of prosperity or happiness or whatever ultimately they need in their lives. The writing style and the prose of the story really captured me immediately, and I felt like it was such an intimate tale with so much compassion from the writer herself, and it just shined for me. I loved this book so much. I love slice of life stories, especially coming of age, and this just checked all of the boxes. Speaking of coming of age stories centering female friendship, the next book I absolutely adored was My Brilliant Friend by Elena Ferrante. This book was truly genius. I was not able to put it down. It was much more intense than I was ever anticipating when I initially picked this book up. The rawness of the story was just something I deeply appreciated. My Brilliant Friend is the first book to a quartet, and this entire series actually follows the entire lives of our two main characters, Elena and Lila, who are two best friends that met as young girls. In the first book, we're essentially following them from early childhood when they first met through their high school experience. This story is set in the 1950s. It's set in Naples. These two girls grew up in a very poor and violent neighborhood, and their environment deeply shapes them and a lot of the choices that they're both forced to make and also want to make. This story is just incredible. It's unflinching in its portrayal of female friendship. And as you see these two girls come of age and also see each other so clearly, they are very much the only people in their lives they feel like wholly understands the other. That being said, you still see the pettiness and jealousy that can often bleed through as well, and also see them overcome various obstacles, not only in their lives, but also in their relationship. Education is a very central topic within this story, as both these girls are in fact brilliant, and you see the parallel existences for both of these girls, as one is able to receive formal education while the other is pulled out of school. The story of these two girls' friendship and their lives is truly gripping, but it's also reflective not only of the town that they live in, the time period, but a nation and society as well. And I also appreciate how Elena Ferrante does not hold the reader's hand. She basically throws you into this neighborhood and you're frantically trying to follow along, capture all of these different family names, rivalries that have extended over generations, and motivations that are deeply rooted in family as well. This book is so good. I can't wait to check out more books in this series later this year, but I'm so happy I finally picked up My Brilliant Friend because it was brilliant. The next book that is on my list I wish I read growing up because I feel like it would have been foundational, but even though I only read it this year, it quickly became one of my new all-time favorites, and that is Daughter of the Forest by Juliette Marillier. Honestly, just all of the pieces of the story I love so much, from the setting to the structure to the writing style to just the overall atmosphere and ambiance. This is a book for me. I love lyrical, nature-forward fantasy stories that center female protagonists protagonists who have to go on some sort of quest. It is a story I fall for time and time again, and Juliette Marillier's version of it, top notch, one of the best I have ever read. In this story, we follow our main character, Sorsa. And she lives in Seven Waters, which is a keep inside of like a magical Ireland for this fantasy setting. She is the youngest child of 7, and she's also the only daughter. She grew up kind of wild, running through the forest, kind of exploring and discovering anything that she found interesting. She was learned, which is very unusual for a female during this time period. And she's also very talented in the healing arts. She's also incredibly close with her brothers, though she does have a more distant relationship with her father. At the beginning of this book, her father has recently remarried, and his new wife quickly casts a spell across the entire household. Now her brothers have been transformed into swans, and it's up to Sorsa to save them. We watch her leave home, traverse through dangerous and magical forests, and also cross waters and enter into enemy territory, all in hopes of trying to save the ones she loves most. This is truly a quest story through and through. It has a bit of romance as well, but it so much centers Sorsa as she overcomes insurmountable odds. This honestly is quite a dark tale. A lot of the topics are rather harrowing, and the emotional intensity of the story really shines through. And something I honestly really appreciated was the amount of time that the author took to really make us believe and understand the love that Sorsa has for her brothers, and how far she's willing to go to save them felt incredibly realistic, and her journey and her commitment to that was so admirable. The writing was beautiful, the setting was beautiful. This element of old magic and like fairies pulling from folklore and stories was just incredible. I loved this book. I'm reading book 2 literally as we speak. I can't wait to read more books by Juliette Marillier. It's like cottagecore fantasy at its finest. And the very last book that's made my top 5 might be a bit of a surprise. I would say objectively, I may have read better books than this, but this book probably brought me the most joy. I had a blast reading it. I could not put it down. And that is The Beautiful Ones by Silvia Moreno Garcia. This book is perfect for fans of like Pride and Prejudice, anything with propriety and romance and melodrama. If you like any of those things, you need to read this book because it has that in spades. Everything about this book captured my attention and my heart, from the romance, the story, to our main character, Nina. I loved it. But this story follows, again, our main character, Nina. And at the beginning of the story, she's just about to debut into society. And she really dreams of becoming a part of this elite socialite group called the Beautiful Ones. However, her debut is not going as well as she was hoping for, as she has telekinetic powers, which often ends with her being the center of gossip. At the beginning of the story, though, she stumbles across an individual named Hector at a party, and he is telekinetic just like her, but instead of hiding it or being kind of embarrassed about her powers, he actually travels the world performing them. She's inspired by him, she's immediately drawn by him, and quickly kind of becomes his apprentice. As her magic and love for him begins to grow, things begin to get rather complicated. And that is because Hector is hiding a secret. That is, Hector was once in love with Nina's older cousin-in-law, who is now currently married to Nina's cousin, who she is staying with. And he's kind of using Nina as an excuse or a reason to get close to her once again. This book is full of melodrama, emotion, miscommunication, propriety, all those balls, those little walks people have to go on. There's countryside setting, there's city settings. Plus all of that combined with delicious miscommunication, angsty, will they, won't they? It just had it all. I could not put it down. I was delighted by it. Not to mention had Silvia Moreno Garcia's incredible writing, like the ambiance and intrigue she was able to build in this. I loved it. I loved Nina. I loved her dedication to herself and her magic, her journey. I really enjoyed the romance in this, in the setting. It was just a delight from beginning to end. Alrighty guys, those are all the books I've read so far in 2022, plus my top 5 reads of the year so far. Let me know down below some of your favorite reads from the year, as I would love to know, and I will see you soon with another video soon. Goodbye.